All right, so this is the first session of the belting workshop. Welcome, everyone. I would love to actually hear a little bit about your own perspectives on belting and what your goals are in terms of belting, the styles in which you sing, why this belting workshop, I think, is kind of an important starting point for us here so that I kind of know how to direct us as we go along. I don't know if Jamie or Brenda, one of you wants to start.
Jamie, you can start.
Okay. Well, my experience with the word belting is kind of been like, stay away from it. Like my teacher that I had as a kid for like 7 years, he always preached like, don't belt, and she doesn't teach belt. And so I'm not really sure what like I was doing in my mix, but I would bring up chest voice, and I didn't yet know about formant tuning or coupling with second harmonics. I've actually just learned about that recently from you, Karen. And so I may have been belting as a young singer, but what I know of it is taking up chest voice above your break, and trying to keep your sound really far forward. And it gets a little bit more nasally. Yeah, so I'm taking the workshop because I was really, I'm shocked by the word belting, just because of my experience with that word. It's like a no-no. And so to take a workshop on it, I've never done anything like that. And I'd love to know the healthy way to belt so that I can at least practice it myself and then research it further to help my students who are interested in musical theater. And I never want to teach them the wrong way. I don't want to damage anybody's voice. So I think it's really important for me to at least get feedback from other teachers from other practices that are comfortable belting.
Good. Yeah. What styles do you sing again?
I sing jazz mainly, but I have been singing musical theater, jazz, like contemporary pop, classical, and then art songs. And that's kind of how I was taught too. It's just kind of like everything that I could consume growing up, and now I'm practicing all of that same stuff again.
Yeah, like me too. Yeah. So Brenda?
I'm actually classically trained, and I'm interested in this because you fall in love with belting when I'm much older than you ladies. So when you're a kid and you hear Annie for the first time or whatever, and you want to belt and it's a little bit easier, that mutational chink, it makes it nice to not have to really push it. But I always found like I was just pushing my chest voice up too high and more yell singing than anything. And so I said, you know what, I'm not a belter. I'm an opera singer, so I'm not gonna. I love it, and it kind of broke my heart to have to say I just can't do it. It's just not a skill that I have. It's not a gift, and so I'm done with it. I appreciate it and love it. So years and years and years and years and years go by, and my 12-year-old daughter, well, she was 12 at the time, I heard her sing in a little homeschool show, and she belted, and it was easy for her, and it was amazing. And I'm like, whoa, what? Where did that come from? And so I gained a new appreciation. I kind of watched her. It was very easy and natural for her. And granted, she was 12. I mean, she might have been 13, but it was her gift. It was very natural, and it fascinated me. So I quit teaching to homeschool, and I've been doing homeschooling for the last 18 years. So I decided, well, I'm going to start teaching again. I didn't decide. It kind of decided for me. And so a lot of the kids that I'm getting in here right now, it's a lot of boys, but most of the girls, and it's musical theater. It's from the local musical theater here in Texas, in Plano. They want to belt, and I was kind of a proponent, like Jamie's teacher. I was like, yeah, if you can't belt in a healthy manner, bad news, you know. I didn't believe that you shouldn't, and I knew, and I of course understood the mix, but it was just sort of a mystery to me. So I started reading up, researching, listening to other people, watching them, and eventually I started to help some of my kids to develop a healthy belt or a healthy mix, really. And so I still don't think that I can personally. I'd love to be able to do something like that, but it's for me, it's still intimidating. I still feel like real self-conscious trying it. So that's why. Been long story short, I'm here to learn the ways of the Force. So, you know, I want to be a Jedi, belting Jedi, whatever. So.
Yeah, so my background is kind of similar, I think, in some ways that I have a light lyric instrument, and for me, belting was just basically being louder in head voice. And that's, you know, I never really pushed my voice. I never worked at trying to make it anything more. I just thought, well, this is as loud as it's ever going to get, and I just accept that my voice is light. And I didn't really understand the idea of belting, like how did everybody else get that big sound? They just have different voices. I didn't really think of it in terms of technique. Like I didn't put two and two together. It was always like, well, God made them differently. You know, like they're just different. They have heavier voices than I have, and I'm just not capable of that. So I'm just going to do the most with my voice that I can. And, you know, and it wasn't until, like my 40s when I realized it's like, I can expect more of my voice than I've been expecting of it. I started reverse engineering sounds and realizing like, no, they're not actually like in a head voice and just singing loudly, because you can only take that so far in a contemporary style. When you're singing classically, there's a different kind of tuning that happens, so you can get a bigger, fuller sound, an unamplified sound. You can't really get that in contemporary styles to the same extent unless you're belting, unless you are carrying to some extent a lot of chest voice up. But yeah, so I have like mixed feelings about belting. I've heard a lot of really bad belting. I've worked with, I have an article on my website, Sing-Align's website, and it kind of became known as like the world's most foremost anti-belting article. But in actuality, it wasn't anti-belting, it was anti-bad belting. And I think people missed that somewhere along the lines, that it was just like, you know, this kind of pure yelling. It's not musical and it's not sustainable. So there's got to be some better way to do this. And as I started to do a lot more research and reading and experimenting in my own voice, I realized that there is, in fact, a much better way than just full-on yelling through. Because I did the whole, when I was teaching myself how to belt, I was just like, well, everybody's telling me that this is just, you're just yelling into the sound. And so I did the whole yell thing, and I did that for like 4 years to no good effect. It was just like, okay, so now I can belt well up into the fifth, or yell well up into the fifth octave. I can yell up to an A5, just fine. But what do I do with that? I have no control dynamically. I have no control in terms of the colors and textures that I have in that belt. There's certainly no room for vibrato at the end if I really want to add that in there. And it just didn't sound musical. It just always sounded like I was yelling. But when you listen to really good belters, there's a call in there, but they're not. It doesn't sound like they're just going, hey, you know, they're not just yelling. And so I was like, well, what gives? Because everybody's saying, well, this is how you develop your belt voice. You just start yelling, hey, hey, right? And I was like, well, I'm doing that, and I can do that really high, but why does it still sound like crap? So yeah, that sent me on a whole journey to try to figure out how do they access that sound, and learning a lot more about the concept of mixed voice, learning a lot more about what it means to have vocal effort, a good vocal effort where there's adequate compression of the vocal folds, and you're getting a longer closed quotient, for example, which we'll talk more about as we go along. And just so you know, Brenda, I will send you the recording of this when I get it posted later on today, like when I get it up. So I'll email that to you. so you can view it again. And I'll also send you the Sunday recording, so you have, because there'll be different questions and different things addressed at times. So I guess the first thing that I want to talk about is the aesthetics of belting. So when you hear belting, like how would you describe that? I guess a belted sound.
More heavy metal. The heavier, more open, and more facial bony structure out here. Nasal quality, maybe brassy. All those for me personally.
Okay. How about you, Jean?
I would say my belt, it's more space in my mouth, more space between my teeth, and probably some modification of the vowel, dynamically larger, and less agility.
Mm.
Yeah.
So like a stiffer sound, I guess, like a.
Yeah.
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 Less flexible there. Less flexible.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, less comfortable.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely comfortable. A lot of mylohyoid action going on too.
Ah, interesting.
Unfortunately, yeah, that's a big challenge for me personally.
Okay, so learning to not like engage the suprahyoid muscles. Yeah, we'll talk more about the mechanism, the mechanics of it too, as well as the acoustical. So some of this up front is going to be theory, and this is how I kind of do these things, sort of talking about things up front, and then doing some experimenting a little bit in our own voices. And then you'll have some tools to work with your students on too, some exercises that you can do with it. And I always tell people, like, I am not an amazing belter. I am not somebody for whom belting ever came easily. I've had to work really hard at building a flexible belt, and it's still not my default. I have a student, and I'm probably going to play a little bit of one of her performances at school. And for her, it was like default setting. And like I actually inherited her from another really amazing teacher who just retired. And both of us have been working to try to like bring her belt down, because it's like ear splitting, like I need like ear damaging. But she's amazing. Like she's 17, and she just has this like crazy belt. And you'll see her, like her microphone's way down here. But she's belting. Oh yeah, like crazy. And I've had to teach her actually to get more flexibility and softness in her belt, so she's got variety. But it's like, and I want to make sure that as we do that, she doesn't lose the strength in her belt, because that's a gift. It's a special thing that she has that I know, like coming from like, and you guys I think understand too, that it doesn't come naturally for everybody. Not everybody finds it easy, and everybody tells you, oh, you already know how to do that. You can yell, right? Well, if you can yell, then you can belt. I don't believe that's the case. I used to try to believe that, but I don't. So we're talking about the aesthetics of belt. Like for me, when I hear belt, I kind of think of it as sort of like trumpet-like, kind of like that brassiness to it. It's kind of locked into a certain resonance coupling, right? Into that yell resonance coupling. But it's got like this really pingy, like to me, like it's like a blast. But then I also know that there are lighter belts, and there are different sounds. It's less blasting, but it's all within that same like range of expressiveness that I would call belt. But yeah, if I can get this to work, I experimented with one of my students earlier. I made like a little video. I didn't quite finish it because I had some videos that didn't download properly. It was like a Demi Lovato in pink. I wanted to include them, but so this is mostly musical theater, I think. But I wanted to play like little bits of this video because I think I want to talk about different techniques and different aesthetics with belt in particular. So let me get back to you guys.
While you're doing it,
Sorry?
I have to turn off my AC. It's too loud.
Oh. I don't hear it from my end at all.
Oh, I don't either.
Okay, good. Just I'm hearing it.
Okay. Tell me if no. What are you seeing on your screen?
Just you right now.
Just me. Okay. Tell me if you can hear this, please.
No good deed will I do.
Can you hear that?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, that's loud.
I was listening to that today. That's
Oh,
crazy.
So I have, okay, so I've got 3 clips of singers who are using, we'll talk more about the technique, but I wonder if, Brenda, maybe this is what you're kind of talking about too, because these suprahyoid muscles, right, underneath the chin, those are part of the swallowing mechanism. You can see me, right?
Yes.
Okay. All I can see is like the wicked picture right now. And so these yank up the hyoid bone. So, so they yank it up when we swallow. And the first 3 clips that I have here are of singers who, when they're belting, it's all on the g sound, all of them. But you can actually hear like this g kind of sound in their belt. And I don't know if it's a technique that they learned somewhere along the line. Like Idina Menzel in this case, like when you listen to her belting other songs when there's no G, I don't hear the same technique. So I would even say that different singers, like or one singer, can use different belt techniques depending on the sound that they're trying to achieve. If they're really flexible and they're really skilled. But yeah, so I just wanted to, like, if you listen to the again when she says that, you can hear like this almost like this good. I'm exaggerating, but it's in there. And then there's one from like Wicked. No, sorry, not Wicked. There's When He Sees Me from Waitress, and then what's the other one I have? I can't remember the other third one. But you can actually hear when they're belting, you can hear this like g in there. And yeah, I'll just play it first.
Good deed will I do. Someone who, when he sees me, wants to again. I won't let them break me down to dust. I know.
Oh, I don't know what happened to that third one. All right, I think this is let's stop sharing. All right, can you see all of us again? Okay, I see you guys again. Yeah, so I don't know if you can kind of hear that. There's really subtle g in there. G. It's So that effectively raises the larynx, right? When you do that, and that narrows and shortens the vocal tract. And I think that's something that helps, like the percussive sound of it, that it's plosive. I think for some singers, they actually use that sound to get that little pressure inside the vocal tract, because if you guys like know anything about like science, right? Like when air pressure has to come into a smaller space, it actually speeds up, right? And that could actually, in the vocal tract, that's actually what creates a more powerful sound, is when you narrow something just enough, you're going to get more bang for your buck, so to speak. So I think somewhere along the lines, they kind of figured that out. I don't know if it's always just with the G's, if with every singer, but so like Kiela Steele, she's got, like, you can hear she's got more of a twangy kind of, like you hear in gospel music, right? Like you hear it's more of a twang register, you might be described at when you get to a certain point, and we're going to talk more about this after, but when you get to a certain point in your range, you kind of have to go, you can only carry that chest voice up so high before it starts to become unhealthy, or you just can't. And so when you get about, in the 5th octave, usually it's about, E5 or so, when it starts getting past that, like on, Defying Gravity, right? Idina Menzel, when you listen to it, it sounds like it's a belt, but she's really just twangifying the heck out of it. It's really just this crazy, like, bright, brassy sound, and it's connected, so it's not head voice. But she's really just using a lot of the twang that you get with twang. You can actually like crank up the loudness just by tuning your resonances to that 3,000 hertz range, right? So that's how, like, the singers form, as you probably have heard, right? So with classical singers, they tune to that 2800, 3000 hertz range, and the human ear perceives that sound very, very well, and we pick up on it really readily. So some of it is just creating this sort of auditory illusion that we're louder than we are. But I think too, the thing that, we'll just get into all this. When we hear recordings, I think too, sometimes we get tricked into thinking that they're much louder than they are. And that's something I'm always careful with my students to help them understand, is that, CDs are highly produced, and they also have a proximity effect with the microphone. So you get close enough to a microphone, you don't even have to be loud. It's going to sound much louder. And so sometimes I think that when somebody's trying to teach themselves how to belt, they assume that it has to be this big, loud, pushed sound, and that's exactly what they do. They push and they strain and they fight for that sound, and they're not going about it in a smart way. They're working harder, not smarter. And that's the one thing I think with belt. It is an athletic thing. I'm not going to say that you don't have to work, you don't have to support it, because you do. But I think people sometimes, when they're trying to teach themselves how to belt in particular, they go about it the wrong way. They work much harder than they have to because they're aiming for loudness, they're aiming for volume instead of aiming for coordination and tuning. All right, so as we're talking about aesthetics, so you can hear again more of the brassy twang belt. I think I have to share it, where you won't hear my volume, my sound at all. All right, now you should be able to hear it. So yeah, there you can hear it's real, like there's a lot of scream in there. It's more scream than it is yell. Did you hear that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Oh,
That's
Jamie,
gospel-y kind of quality, and that, yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very bright. It's crazy bright, brassy. And I describe it as more of your scream. That's what she's getting into there, to get that sound in a healthy way and to get it full. Because again, once you get up to a certain point, you just can't bring a full chest voice up. It just, physiologically, it's not possible, and acoustically, it's not.
Screaming isn't in chest at all. Yelling is more in your chest, and screaming is in your head voice.
I think if you do a whimper, what you feel is the pharyngeal walls narrowing, and you'll feel the compression in the sound, but the vocal folds are thinning. So she's getting into that, where it's she's actually using a cry kind of into the sound, right? And as soon as you cry into the sound, it stretches the vocal folds, but it keeps it compressed. So I think what we're hearing as belt is a longer closed quotient than head voice. So the vocal folds are making contact with each other for longer during each vibratory cycle, coming together, staying closed. So I think what she's doing is she's coming closer to matching levels of closed quotient. But she's not in chest voice like that. Yeah.
And then you said also the pharyngeal wall is narrowing as well as a closed quotient. Those two factors are taking, and of course what's going on in the mouth, the vowel, and then got it.
Yeah, and I mean obviously her vowels are bright. And again, we're going to talk about belt vowels and stuff in a bit, but so she's really kind of going into the sound. When you do that, you can feel the compression. And when you're doing twang, there are two different ways to make twang. There's a lower twang that's used more by classical singers, which is more the epilaryngeal narrowing that you get with the singer's formant. And then what most singers of contemporary styles use is more of an upper twang. I know Chadley Valentine and what was her name? Is it Karen? I can't remember her name now. Anyway, she's a professor that they did a Nats chat a little while ago about twang, and she was showing actually the scopes, and you can see that with contemporary singers, there's a narrowing up higher up in the pharyngeal walls, and I know I feel that when I do certain types of belts. when I do more of a closed voice belt, and I kind of follow more of a classical leaning to it, I feel that narrowing inside my throat more than I do when I do like a yell, full on yell. And I think that narrowing actually also helps to propel the sound, right? Kind of that you need that narrowing, but I think it also protects the voice. I know I feel like I can get much louder with it without quite as much effort, but then having more control over the sound. I want to make sure I included some guys in this. I don't know, I have one guy, because I know on Sunday I have a male coming to the group, so the workshop. Okay, so we're still sharing, so you should still be able to hear this. But we can hear them, like, so here we've got more of kind of the traditional like mixed yell belt, where it's not, he's not going full on, hey! He's not doing that. I'm sorry if my sound cuts out. I was going to put my mic. So he's not doing that, but you can hear it's more of a mix, but he's got a little bit of yell in the sound.
We see his light, 'cause the sun burns bright. We could be alright for forever this way.
That's not
But you used to be
that's your yell belt.
We used to be
And you can hear with Jessie Mueller there, like you can hear that sometimes the tongue root engages a bit. Oh, can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, I don't see you when I go into that chair. But you can actually hear it points, and that I think is a little bit of the swallow reflex with the tongue root engaging. She doesn't do it all the time, but when she gets heavier like that, that's another way that singers use. They try to create a heavier belt sound is by engaging the tongue root. And it's also part of twang too, because in twang, like sometimes there's again the upper twang is created with a narrowing of the pharyngeal walls, but also a little bit of tongue root pressure. So sometimes I know we're always afraid of tongue root pressure, and I work a lot at helping the singers get rid of tongue root pressure. But sometimes with belting, if you can do it in a healthy way where you're not like it's not interfering with the larynx's ability to coordinate for the pitch and the register, then sometimes it can help you. And if it doesn't sound gagged, like she doesn't sound gagged when she does it. But that to me is like your traditional yell belt when I hear those two versions. Did you have something to say, Jamie?
Oh, the tongue root pressure going downward and causing less space in the pharyngeal cavity?
Yeah, so I think it counters the larynx wanting to go up, and usually this is what happens when we get above a certain point, right? The larynx just naturally goes up intuitively, right? And then the tongue root wants to kind of stuff it back down. So I think that it's in response to the hyoid bone rising, and I think it kind of tends to bunch up. But then when you get that yell belt, you can hear it's a deeper sound than what you hear in like a lot of musical theater, for example. Like, I mean, this is musical theater, but it's got that kind of country sound to it, right? Where there's a darker sound, generally speaking. So you can create a heavier belt doing that, but the larynx tends to sit a little bit lower with that traditional yell belt than it does with like a mixed belt. Like I've got Sutton Foster. So I've got a sample of her singing where you can hear that it's actually a little higher larynx. You can hear the brightness and the brassiness in the sound, and it's more of a mixed belt, less of the call voice kind of sound. Yeah, let's see what's next.
I don't care if he's a nobody. In my heart, he'll be a somebody to love me. I need it.
So the tracking was like so off of that. But I don't know if you can hear that too, where it's like it's more in the space. She's not going so. just keeping it there. Let me get to this. But yeah, so it's a different sound, and it's a little less heavy, and you won't generally hear the tongue root engaging. It tends to be tuned brighter with twang, but it's more like pharyngeal narrowing twang, and you don't get as locked into that yell resonance coupling. It's there, but it's like part of it is just learning to control that sound too. But I know it feels different. Questions, thoughts?
Yeah, with lowering your larynx, is there something that, like, because I just, if I think about lowering my larynx, I don't think I can just do it. Do you have any tips for, like, tricks to learn how to do it, and, like, memorize that positioning?
For me, I don't ever focus on consciously manipulating the height of the larynx. I focus on sound instead, because that's something I think that our brains can wrap their minds around. Like when we're swallow, we're not thinking, okay, I need to raise the larynx and retract the tongue to swallow, right? Our brains just tell us what to do, and they just know how to coordinate. So what I do is I focus on, like, adding more depth or darkness into the sound. So that, like, right, where you like, oh, what most singers want to do is, so they want to go, ba, 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 and the larynx starts to go up, right? So when the vowel starts to change from ba to ba, the larynx has gone up. So if instead they focus on the b, the darkness, maintain the same darkness, the larynx will stay stable as they go higher. But yeah, that's how I generally do that. Kind of like a wise old owl sound. And that's what I usually tell them. Don't go to baby owl. You don't want baby owl. You want ooh. It's a very hooty sound. You won't always sing like that, obviously, but that's kind of how I do it. I think, okay, wise old owl, because ooh, 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 instead of baby owl, or like, yeah, just even like a vampire. Oh, oh. I mean, there I'm retracting my tongue a tiny bit to do it, but or even like the Yogi Bear, we all know how to do it. But then when it comes to the physical aspect of it, I really just focus more on, like, the inhale, the deep inhale posture. That's all you need. It lowers the larynx. You don't have to think about it.
Okay.
Sighing into the sound. Oh, a deep sigh is really good for stabilizing the larynx as you go higher. The Alexander techniques, whispered ah. But I will say this though, with belting, you actually don't want the larynx too low. It needs to sit higher than it does for most singing. And part of that, again, is the need to compress the sound and shorten the vocal tract so that you can raise your first formant so that it can track that second harmonic. Otherwise, it's going to go into head voice once you get above that juncture of the first formant for that vowel and the second harmonic of the pitch. So I know we're always told, oh, lower the larynx, but that's great if you're a classical singer, but it's not going to work if you're singing in contemporary styles. And you don't have to worry about the height of the larynx at all, unless it's like way up. If it's way up really, really high and the singer feels like he or she's like poking on it, that's a problem of tension. That's not a problem of the laryngeal height. That's a problem of these muscles not being released. I have a whole video on, like, a bunch of different exercises to release here and the muscles in the front of the neck that I do use with my students during lessons when necessary. And I have students who tend toward tightness in general, and they're just always, they have a head forward posture, so everything's shortened and contracted here. So before we even do any work on belting, we will spend a few minutes doing that. And that's something that, Brenda brought up too, is just that she feels the tension, right? So you may find that you do better if you start to release that tension first. So you're kind of starting with a fresh slate and then working on the belt technique itself. So I was just going to show you this part of a performance with my students, what I'll talk about. So with her, and I think you can't really hear it. This is like a Facebook download. But when she's standing over here, I hear this crazy compression in her voice. Like it's like everything like narrows, this tiny, tiny opening, and then it's like boom. And it's got a different sound from other belts that I've heard, definitely. Like she's creating it differently, and I'm like, how can I like replicate that in my own voice? And it almost turns into like a voce chiusa, like a closed voice, that compression that you hear in like a Pavarotti classical tenor, where it's like it sounds like it's contained and compressed, but at the same time it is coming out, and it's still big and powerful. And you hear that too when you listen to How Far I'll Go from Moana. That last C5 that she sustains, she's actually doing that acoustically closed. She's not doing it in a traditional yell coordination, and she acoustically closes off a lot of her singing. So is that like, do you guys understand what I mean by acoustically closing off?
In comparison, comparing it to Pavarotti, are you saying it's similar to that sort of vocal protection that he enacts? Okay, all right, now I understand what you're saying. Okay.
Yeah, and it feels like when I do it, like it feels like it's like I'm like doing like a little bit of like a grunt when I do that right now, but it feels like that inside the throat, but it feels really good. Like it doesn't hurt. It doesn't like, and I can go. I'm not going to probably do it now, but and I've been vocalizing like with my students all day. So.
And so so physiologically, what is taking place then when she does that? What is it? Can you describe what that feels like, or what that, you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, to me, I feel a narrowing when I do that as compared to when I do a yell. When I do like just a yell belt, it feels deeper. It feels more open. When I do like the Thoroughly Modern Millie with the Sutton Foster version of belt, it feels like here, and it doesn't feel as compressed. It feels lighter, and it feels like more speech level in terms of how things are shaped. Whereas like the way she's doing this, it's like my student does it, it's kind of a little bit sometimes almost lower larynxed.
Okay.
But you'll hear like she's not really low larynx. It's just like it's not like classical low,
Right.
but it's not as high as I think what Sutton Foster would be. But we also have to think about voice types too, because how Sutton Foster sounds, Sutton Foster doesn't have a big voice. Just she is, I'd say, very similar in terms of vocal weight to me. She's not a heavy singer, but then you listen to like, Kiala, right? She's got like this heavy gospel sound. I mean, completely different singers. So you could take two singers belting the same note, same song, and aesthetically it's going to sound very different. And I think it's important for us and for our students to learn to be able to develop different approaches to belts so that we can have that flexibility in our sound and we can have more sounds on our artist's palette. But I find usually singers tend to gravitate toward one aesthetic more than others and one technique more than others. So like I'm trying to figure out my students' technique, like how that could work in my own singing, because it's cool. It's just for, I don't know how she did it. This is how she's always belted, her mom said. And, in working with her other teacher, if her other teacher did not teach her belt, she just worked on trying to help her find balance and control it and such. But she didn't teach her that technique. But you can listen. This is like a talent show she did, kind of a longer clip. You guys can still see it, right? So yeah, I don't know, can you hear that? It's kind of bad recording, but you can hear like there's a lot of cheering going on and people couldn't like hear her as well. All right, are you back to our normal view here? But yeah, you can't, but it's like, it's this really compressed sound when you hear it. And it's just like I said, crazy loud. And I don't think you can see it, but her microphone was out here. And even with all the cheering, like over top of that, and the recording took place back farther into the auditorium. So it's just, she's got crazy vocal chops. All right, so I want to make sure we have time to talk about some of the more practical things. So I did want to talk about aesthetics because I think it's important, again, for us to understand that there are different aesthetics with belt. There's not just one way to approach it technically either. There are different, I think that we're all just, we gravitate towards something differently, and I think part of that is the styles in which we sing. When you listen to, you know, belting in rock, for example, if it's alternative rock, it's generally that lower, slightly lower larynx. It's generally a darker sound. When you listen to like the 80s hair metal rock, you know, it's more of a twangy belt. You hear a lot of like the whine cry into it. And even if it's in chest voice, it just tends to be brighter with a higher larynx. You listen to musical theater, and there's a whole, because musical theater covers so many different styles, there's a whole broad spectrum. But I would say that Sutton Foster, the way that she is belting with more of a lighter mix, is more standard. And then again, you've got, you know, and I would say like Idina Menzel too, like she's more of that standard mixed belt kind of quality where it's not as heavy, and the larynx is almost, I'd say, almost neutral with it. But yeah, it's just like, I feel like it's anything goes. So I think in helping our students find belt, they have to find what works for them. So when I'm working with it, one of the first things I talk about is the vowels. So we know that certain vowels, because of their lower first formants, are not good belt vowels. So that would be your E, I, and your, I would say, oo. Those are the three big non-belt vowels. So you will not hear, oh, I should have recorded, you know, what's the Lauren Allred song from Greatest Showman?
Never Be Enough.
Yeah, Never Enough. That's right. Yeah. So if you listen to For Me, she sings for me, for May.
Yeah.
I think it's, yeah, she completely breaks the vowel. I don't even say she's modifying the vowel, she breaks it. There's another song I was listening to the other day, same thing, exactly the same thing, because the E is not a good belt vowel. So she was only able to take that for me, so high. And then if she really wanted to turn into a belt as opposed to staying in kind of a mix or going into head, she had no choice but to break that vowel and go to a belt vowel. So your belt vowels are generally your fronted vowels, your A's and A's, but ah has the highest first formant. So if you wanted a warmer, darker belt, you could go toward an ah. And that would actually give you a lot of room for belting.
Yes.
In musical theater, because I do a lot of musical theater, the ah is our friend because it is that bright, brassy kind of vowel just like naturally, inherently. And so I shade as many of my vowels toward ah as I can. Even my A, when I get above about my A, B4, around there, I start shading my A toward an ah. And it starts to kind of adopt a little bit of an ah-ishness with the tongue. But yeah, so I think it's important to understand that there are vowels that just are not conducive to belting. And so that's important because when we're helping our students, we have to help them understand that too, that there's a reason why this vowel always flips into head voice here. It's nothing to do with you. You're not technically inferior to the next singer. There's an acoustical reason, and that acoustical reason affects the physiological. So again, O, for example, is kind of middle of the road in terms of its formant, its first formant. And you can belt on an O. O tends to, because it's a back vowel, tends to sound a little darker and heavier. And you will reach a point at which the O starts to modify if you want to belt in it, and it starts to shade towards your ah. And it's kind of like that even in classical singing when you get up into the head register. All the back vowels start to sound a little ah-ish. They all go in that direction. And I feel like in between there are sometimes those mixed vowels, like the Goethe vowel, I hear that in a lot of singers for a few notes between. But the ultimate goal is with any kind of form of tuning is to get to the point where you find the vowel that works best for you on a given pitch, and to be able to learn to tweak that vowel to find the right tuning so that it becomes efficient and you can get that like trumpet-like blast. But just understanding that E, U, I, not good. And then like the A, as, and ahs, good vowels, is really important. Any questions? No? All right. So I guess if we're talking about like developing a healthy, flexible belt voice, which to me is the ultimate goal, again, that whole yell thing didn't work for me for 4 years. So I had to learn to find a real mix that allowed me to keep the compression in my voice, but let the vocal folds thin as I moved higher. When I did that, I started finding more of a tuning that worked for my voice for its natural lightness and what have you. Let me see. All right, so, and the other thing I think too, and I mentioned this earlier, was especially with the students, I think the idea of belting, if it doesn't come naturally for them, it really messes with their heads, because we start to think, oh, we have to yell, we have to shout, we have to push and force. And as I mentioned, it's a very athletic coordination, and I'm not trained in this still. I know Allison, who has been in some of these workshops as well, she's trained in it still, she's certified. So she would be a better person to ask on Sunday. So maybe when she comes on Sunday, you guys will get that. So maybe I'll be able to ask her some questions about body anchoring, that as Estelle teaches it. I don't really teach anchoring per se. I feel like oftentimes singers just kind of intuitively figure some of that out. But the support aspect is really important, managing the breath. And it is a little bit different from classical singing, where the goal is not to slow down the rise of the diaphragm. You actually need a fair bit of pressure to counter the effort in here. And even when I'm belting, I still maintain a little bit of rib openness, though. I will say that, because I don't want to over pressurize with my vocal folds being not as dense as some people's. But if we were to do like a whimper, and just whimper a few, I'm going to let you guys do that, and feel free to mute yourselves, because it'll probably sound weird if I was doing it. Just on a comfortable pitch, and then you could go up a little higher. But what you should really feel is like these oblique and transverse muscles contracting. Some people feel the rectus abdominis muscle contracting. And you want it twangy, like you want it a little bit on the brighter side for that. And you should feel that sense of contraction, a little squeeze. Good, okay.
Muted it.
What was that?
I said I muted it.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, it would be like a mess if we all kind of sang at the same time. But yeah, so that, I feel like that's kind of all that we need for the most part. You've got twang, you've got a cry in the sound that's going to, again, help in the vocal folds as you go a little higher, but at the same time, cry also compresses the vocal folds. So I think that's what gives us a nice flexible mixed belt. And also, before I forget, and you guys understand this already, but I always just remind students that, like, you don't belt through an entire song. Not only is it just that be tiring over the course of an entire concert or whatever, but it just musically speaking, it's just not a good idea. Like, you need to have more choices, and that gets tiring for the listener as well if you're only just yelling and belting through every single phrase. So a lot of what we hear as kind of belting Let's see, she is hard on herself, hard. That could be thought of as like a belt, but it's really soft. Hard on herself, hard. Technically, I'm above the performance. I'm actually blocking my second harmonic with my first formant there. But I would call that more of a mix. Hard on herself. Oh, oh. I can get that blocking without having to yell. Sorry, but yeah, so my point is that you can have something that resembles a belt that isn't necessarily always a belt. Sometimes it's just tuning, and sometimes if you could bring that level way down, that's probably more of a mix. And starting from that mix, you can bring it up to a real full belt. But yeah, so I play around with that, like phrases like that all the time, where I used to kind of dig in and I used to go into like a yell belt, and it always sounded way out of place. And so that's another thing I try to teach my students is like, does this fit? Artistically, does this fit with the rest of the vocal phrase, with the rest of the song? Does it fit with what is actually happening in the story? And that's really important for them to consider, because again, it's like this holy grail, again, a belt, a belt. And they will try to get there at all costs, and then once they figure it out, they will try to use it everywhere and try to like rein that in. Like, no, save it for those moments when you really, when it makes artistic sense, when it makes technical sense. Save it. And that's when it's going to be ultimately more powerful. It's going to have more impact on the listener. All right. So back to this whimper. So if we cry into the sound, if we just open up to an ah, but we don't change anything, we're going to start to notice that the tuning gets a little bit brighter. And like I feel, but I still feel like it's really here. I feel the vibrations here. I'm not aiming to sound there, but the whimper just does that naturally. And then it thins the vocal folds, but you can hear it's still like a belt. Like it's still, I don't know how it comes through actually with the digital translation. But yeah, just try that for a second, like kind of go up in pitch and don't over pressurize. Because you can easily go, right? Like you can make it into this yell, but how small can you make it and still have it be a belt? Theoretically, with the whimper, you should have a fair bit of control and leeway in terms of how heavy that sound is. Just play around with that for a minute.
It starts to get hard for me really fast.
You know about where?
Well, there's adjustments that I'm going to have to make above B flat 4, right? I mean, that makes sense. I'm a soprano, whatever. It's pretty easy up to that point, and it does feel easier and better. You know, when that's engaged, that sort of whimpery in here, right in through here, callish sort of thing. But I'm gonna have to do something once I get to the B flat. You know, it wants to flip, and but I don't want to go back and fall back into those old habits of pushing through it. You know, and then everything here, the jaw and isn't released, and again the tongue underneath here is all bunched up. Whatever, that achy feeling right above the hyoid. That's always been kind of my challenge. Not when I sing, obviously in my head voice or anything, or even in my mix. It's just for the belt. And so that's where I have to try and what adjustments need to be made, to have that work, to sound and feel good. That's my.
I get that. Yeah, so I noticed, so my break is around that area, right? The A, B flat, B, the typical place, right? And I feel like if I don't start adding whimper by about A, B sharp, right around there, I have to cry into the sound. Otherwise, it just goes into like M2. It just wants to go into like I'll stay in a head mix, so it's connected, but it's definitely not belt worthy. So I have to add cry into the sound, and I have to I feel the compression changing. I have to work differently.
Yeah, it clicks into a different place. I can feel it getting narrower, but I have to almost make that happen. It's not natural. So you're just saying adding the cry at that B flat 4. I'm already doing the whimper. The cry's a little bit different, right?
Whimper and cry to me are the same thing.
Same thing. Okay.
Yeah. And then there's sob though. Like sob is like the it's low, right? It's lower larynx, it's sadder. And that's another thing. It does the same thing, but you just don't get the brightness to it. So if you wanted to do like a darker belt, you could do more of a sob into the sound. Like if you listen to like a Demi Lovato, she does a little more sob than cry into her a lot of her belting. But yeah, I just like to listen to what they do. It's amazing, like the whole spectrum of sounds that we get, and try to like reverse engineer that to figure out what are they doing, like where's the larynx, like how are they engaging the tongue root, and how bright is the vowel, what vowel are they singing? Are they really singing the vowel that's written, or are they singing a variation on that, or a modification? But yeah. I have to really I feel it when I do that. I feel a crazy amount of work here, and obviously it would be better if we were standing.
So you're feeling more work down in the oblique, and you said the rectus abdominis, in that area. You're feeling more work the higher you go,
and I feel more work here. But this is matching this. So my resistance levels are matching down here. But what happens when you get about your break area is the closed quotient starts to change. And it will change dramatically if we're not coordinated, right? But part of that is because we get to a certain point where the vocalis muscle, the chest voice muscle that provides that medial compression, brings the vocal folds together from the middle, it can only go so far. Otherwise, you get into yell. But if you want a flexible belt, right, what you have to do is you have to start relying on the posterior compression more. And that's like the Ingo Tietze in one of his master classes described it as sort of like a mouse. It feels different from hey.
Okay.
Sorry, my voice probably cuts out afterwards, right? It's Zoom. It's not meant for singers. Meant for speakers, and that's why I was going to try to set my mic. But when you do that, like you can feel a narrowing. It doesn't feel bad. Like you feel feel free to like mute yourself whenever you want to, and just like try that for a second. But it feels very different from how I compress if I'm staying in chest voice. And for me to stay in chest voice there, hey, 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 hey. It feels it's different, and it doesn't feel as narrow. It actually feels a little in my throat. So learning to kind of counter that, I can go in chest voice and I can let the larynx go up a little higher by going brighter with the vowel. And I can play around with those instead of going hey, 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 and it just becomes a brighter vowel instead of hey, and I feel like it's less soft. But the big thing for me is like letting the compression change. See, it's already got more flexibility. I can.
And you hear it flip into that just a little bit almost protected, like thinner. You can hear it narrow.
Yeah. And it
Yeah.
feels, literally, it feels narrower in the throat as well.
Yeah.
And I feel more resonance here as opposed to like back here where I feel the hey.
Yeah.
Like try that just for fun. Like play around with that. Like just mute yourselves and then just try like different, go into the hey and then go into try to brighten it. Try to brighten the vowel and get it kind of more here in terms of where you feel the resonance. And then thin it, just bring it down to like the whimper. The whimper, but with a little yell in it. How'd you do, Jamie?
Yeah, they're feeling, well, okay, both ways feel the same, probably the same comfort level, but I was noticing like, oh, well, I was nasalizing the sound more with brightening the sound. Is that correct?
I don't generally nasalize my sound, but there's nothing necessarily wrong with that as long as it's not too late funky, I think. Because the more you open up that nasal port, the weaker the resonance actually becomes, because now you're introducing anti-resonances into the vocal tract. So you're diminishing the oral formants for the sake of adding nasal formants. So I'm always really careful with that with a belt especially. Yeah, so when I do like the twangy wow 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 kind of sound, wow 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 wow, right? It sounds like it's nasalized. Wow. It's not. That's just because of the higher formant I'm on. So I go more into that space, the twangy wah space, than really nasalize it. Because you don't want to depressurize it either. You open up that nasal port and it depressurizes the vocal tract.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so what's a practical way to like, how would you describe brightening your sound other than using like, brightening is kind of like a texture word, but if I wanted to like communicate that to a student like who doesn't get that language, how do you brighten your sound?
So I generally would just like demonstrate, because again, I think the trying to consciously manipulate things sometimes is really hard for people, but they can mimic sounds oftentimes like more readily than they can copy coordination per se. So like I said, the hey, hey, when you do that, right? Huh, huh, you can hear like an in the vowel. Sort of like you think over vowel, under vowel, right? This is like an and this is an and together they make a certain sound. When you're doing like a brighter, higher larynx sound, it's like it's all, the vowel feels like it's all here. And I will generally get them into more, I like before I do any belt stuff, I work on twang. We kind of skipped over that today, but we would generally do like the nya 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 nya, those kinds of exercises, the wah wow 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 wow, getting them kind of learning to be able to get that feeling of it here and getting the brightness in the sound, because I think that's important. But again, aesthetically speaking, what if they want a darker belt? I think it's healthy to get some twang in there to get that pinginess in the sound, but I think you can do that also with a slightly lower larynx, in behind the wah, 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 wah. So there's still twang, but yeah, I don't just teach it one way. I guess that's the way.
Yeah.
Wow, it's been so long since I've sung. My voice is like trying to find where it's supposed to go right now. So yeah, I would generally do like wah 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 wah, and get them to do that, because again, that gets them like you know, just get the twang gets things spinning a little bit. But then there's that's the other exercise to have you do is you take it like that. The hey sound. Hey, hey, hey. Kind of hey, hey, hey. Down my little range of very but yeah, when you do that, like the idea of it kind of feeling more here as opposed to hey, hey. You don't want to get into that. Wow, wow, wow. Hey, hey. And you try that because you've got like a belt vowel there, and the A is going to go into belt more readily than like an ad. But I think the best way to teach the brightness is to demonstrate it, and then to get them doing naturally brighter vowels like ah. And even like an E is a brighter vowel, but again, it's not really great for belting per se. But if they have a nice E that's bright and pink, you should probably use it as a pilot vowel. Yeah, yeah, to get them to find that brightness.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Yeah. Does that answer it?
Yes, yeah, that's great. And demonstrating myself is, I agree, is probably the best way.
So that was the other thing too, talking about bright versus dark. I know Melissa Cross does this with like the Zen of Screaming, and I know like Renee Fleming has used this in the master class before, where you just kind of bite the pencil gently. And then you imagine the sound is going over the pencil as opposed to under. Have you ever seen that before? I know I talked about it in one of my videos too, but so if you think of like an or an or whatever, and you think under the pencil, right? What happens? It gets dark and kind of sounding right. Generally speaking, if we're thinking dark, the tongue will flatten and pull back, and the larynx will lower. But if we try to go over the pencil, and yes, the vowel modifies a little bit. I'm not thinking about modifying the vowel, it just does. And that's another way I sometimes get brightness out of singers, because when they're thinking over the pencil, suddenly now that the tongue kind of goes a little more fronted and higher, and then they get those higher overtones of the sound.
Thank you.
I know I'm kind of going all over the place today. I didn't kind of like a clear, like I just had a few things I wanted to make sure we discussed. Speaking of Melissa Cross, though, there was an exercise that she has with the rainbows. Are you guys familiar with her Zen of Screaming videos?
What's her name?
Melissa Cross. She, her big thing is she works with like screamo, heavy metal singers. Like she was actually classically trained, and that's her thing now. Is her niche is she just works with almost exclusively with like metal singers and like screamo, like yeah. It's kind of interesting. I actually got the DVD because I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if in the middle of a song, if I really wanted to express things, I just kind of screamed into it and it sounded cool, and it was like the shock sound.
Yeah.
The surprise effect. So she did this exercise, which is also a good one for strengthening the chest voice muscles when you have singers who don't carry chest voice very high, but it does put you in a yell. Where she paints 3 rainbows and you're singing whoa. You get this little rainbow, right? This little arc. And so the pitch is lower and it's shorter in duration. And then the next arc is a little higher, right? And it's a little longer in duration. And then the third arc is up higher. And she kind of stops on the top of the arc. I was kind of stopped for a second and then come back down. I was like, God, got my vocal folds. So whoa, whoa, whoa.
Cool.
Can you hear me yet?
Yes.
Okay. So when I do it, though, I make sure it's over pressurized. I could go heavier. I could go more like yell with it, but I try to give it some flexibility. And I never like really dig into the sound and go necessarily as loud as I can go with it. But just for fun, one could take a lot of exercise too, and just see. Like I found like, I feel like with students, what happens is they start out at a certain point. Like I wasn't able to carry my chest voice above about an F4 until a few years ago, because I never really tried, and I was always like, it always felt bad, it always hurt. But when I locked into this yell resonance coupling, when I locked into the yell, I found like the call of the voice, I was able to start doing that, and then now I can carry that, up into the lower part of the octave with the flow. But I have to feel like when I get to the higher rainbows, I can't lock into that too heavily, or it does become like this ugly sound, and I can't control it. I almost feel like this sense of, I add the whimper into the sound. Oh, oh, oh. Yeah. I have to add it. Yeah. Otherwise, it does become this really like sound. I'm like all over the place today. I don't know. Sorry.
Hey.
Try that for a second. Try like the 3 rainbows. Try it a couple times. But don't like lock in so heavy again that you have no place to go. So if you want to go higher with it, you can't dig in too hard. You can't go too heavy with it. And try sustaining the top arc too, just for a sec. Like sit on that. As long as it feels comfortable and it feels like efficient, just sit on that for a second. You can feel like it starts to sit in this really nice place when you get used to it. How'd that go?
Okay, I got a lot of work to do, so it's just a whole nother way of thinking. I mean, and I knew it was, there's certain things I already knew and I understood, and I try to help my students with, but when you're doing it yourself, and you're used to doing it a certain way, and your muscle memory takes over, and you're just like, no, do it this way. Just, it's harder.
Yeah. So, how'd you do, Jimmy?
It felt pretty comfortable. I noticed, I can hear myself talking now. I noticed myself like doing the whimper, and the whimper was, I tried to shorten it more, because when I took my time trying into it, it felt more like a kind of a crack, and I felt myself wobble from the 2 registers. It almost felt like just kind of feeling it out, and then establishing chest voice, and then going up. It was strange. It felt weird at the onset, but up top, it felt good.
Yeah. Like I said, I just sort of intuitively go into the whimper, because if I don't, it just gets too thick, too heavy, and I can't go up higher. I don't use this for teaching belt, because again, it is that kind of more locked, fixed kind of coordination. But I kind of use it as a litmus test in some ways. It's like, how are you doing with your belt? Are you developing more flexibility? If you are, then you should be able to take that rainbow higher. But in and of itself, generally students will just go right into a yell, and it will only go so high, maybe to a B or something, or an A, and that's it. But again, kind of thinking, I'm big into the psychology of singing, and how my first teacher told me that singing is 80% psychological. And there's just so much of how we think about our voices and the relationships that we have with our voices that affect things. And I think, again, it comes to belting too. We're afraid of belting. It really messes with how we coordinate, and we have a lot of difficulties getting our voices to cooperate and do what we want them to do. So that's why sometimes we bypass that fear reflex by tricking the voice. Hey, hey, how you doing? You know, like just like what would you do? Or what if somebody stepped on your toe? Ow! Right? Like we're not like, ow, oh, right? We're not singing that. We're like, ow, right? That scream, ow, ow, ow.
More
Like
primal.
learning to be able to kind of say, well, you know, put it in different scenarios, right? Like, hey, you see a cute guy, hey. And then now what if he's across the street? Hey, you know, like that kind of thing. What if you're you know, what if you're trying to call your mom, like you're a kid and you're trying to call your mom, right? Like, are you like, mom, right? Like, mom, mom, you know, and you're kind of like, if you go up a little bit higher in pitch, like, mom, 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 and you take that up higher, you stay on that speech level, and you just bring it. I always like to go mom and go down to not stuck on that. Mom, mom, ah. And I always have to whimper it too. Like you don't really hear it necessarily, but it's like if you add like a little bit of like a whining to it, mom, like you're kind of whining into it. I feel like that gets the squeeze, a good squeeze, and a thinning. So that's another exercise I do. Is just it's like, yeah, just try to like walk up, but the idea is to really think of it more as kind of connecting to speech as opposed to singing. Because as soon as like some singers get into singing mode, then everything falls apart because they're trying to control the sound too much. They're trying to make it and shape it and mold it into something rather than like letting the voice coordinate as it intuitively would. And more I'm realizing just how much our voices are just intuitively capable of figuring out if we don't interfere, but we always interfere. So just try that for a second. Just try mom, and then go into like a little whimper, like you're crying into the sound because you're like whining, and just bring it up as high as you can. And I feel like again, when I get above my A, B flat, I have to go, ma, I have to cry into that a lot more. Mom, 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 I have to, and that narrows everything. That gives it more without me having to work towards it. So don't be afraid of that sound, even though it sounds like a little annoying at first. Yeah, I'll let you try that. And keep it in that bright forward space, the wah space, instead of going ma, ma, ah, ah.
I think I did better with that one, actually. I was able to get pretty easily up to a C.
Yay.
So that one was good for me. And it was what you said, not doing the ma, but the more ma, ah, you know, changing the vowel, making it a more beltable vowel. And then adding that whimper cry factor in and keeping the space open too. And then that equalizing. That was good. That did it for me. I just, I struggle with trying to push, and then you have that, feeling that you have to clear your throat or it's starting to hurt. And, the only thing that's going to help is, a shot of whiskey or something. But, which I have done. I have done that to relax things a couple times, but especially the older I get, because it's just like, the voice isn't as, it's still, I feel really still agile, but it gets, the rebounding from singing a lot takes a little bit longer, takes me a little bit longer to warm up. And I can't sing for as long as I could when I was younger, but I think I've stayed pretty healthy vocally. Yeah, mostly because I, don't I don't push it. So, but that one worked. That was a really effective exercise.
Good. And you could come up with your own vocal phrases too that work for that. Like, just like short, usually like single syllable, maybe 2-syllable kind of words that you can come up with. Like, that's why people like always go to the hey. But yeah, like the mom is good. Like you think of like a kid, a whiny brat, mom, because then you get that built-in cry and whine in there that works. But yeah, you can't think of anything else right now. But I know lots for twang, but not in my room. How do you do, Jamie?
It was even more effective for me as well. Mom, it just having the M, like to be able to vocalize it on a consonant, on M, you want to hum first and then go into that higher or like ma'am. It's like, it was definitely brighter. I brightened the vowel and more toward an ah place, and I was able to get higher than any of the other exercises. So yeah, it was great.
Winner, it's a winner, yeah.
Yeah, I get higher on that exercise too. I'm able to definitely coordinate a lot more easily. And again, I think some of it comes down to if you're not thinking, then your voice just kind of like you're just thinking like you're a whiny brat or something. But
Yeah.
so you could take that same exercise and do like the mom, and like it might take a little bit of work to get to the point where you can coordinate that. Mom, and then you have to have your impression, right? Mom. I think you're gonna my voice is not strong today. But yeah, so the I don't go with mom, and you could take that, or you could even just like a third or something. Mom. Shorten the interval a little bit, so that they're learning to kind of be able to bring that. But even like mom, and you can even do mom and go the opposite direction. It might be better with that, getting the distance pattern first, because then it drops the weight a little bit, right? It drops the pressure, and then they bring it back up, and then that way they're not bringing up a ton of weight. Sometimes if we go in ascending patterns, it's like not helpful.
Okay.
Variation and exercise.
Yeah. So there's like speaking of like descending and ascending patterns, like and kind of thinking in terms of a character, like you could do like the no way, no. You want this like no. O is not a great dump vowel per se. I mean, it's good for the mid range. But then the way, and there you have to go into the real like way, hey. You have to go into that whimper up there, and I always again find when I get to the A, I have to start like modifying the vowel a little bit more to ah and adding more cry. Way, wah. Way. But that's another like exercise that I like to do with students, because that sort of defiant no, that gives them like, you can hear like the punchiness of it, no, and it gets them kind of connecting. And then then you've got your belty kind of vowel in there. But yeah, you do have to modify those vowels a bit too, because even the A you can only take it so high. Yeah, that's where the hey comes in too, I guess, if you're calling across the street, but like it's to a boy you see or something that you really like, and you know, because then you're not going, hey, Mallory. I don't know. I don't know. Any thoughts or questions?
The only question that I really had, I love all of these exercises, and it doesn't feel uncomfortable. So I don't see this as a damaging practice. So just to like carry forward with me, what would you say is most important in protecting the voice while belting? What can I do to protect my voice while I belt?
So I would say, like, I think when people do damage, it's because they think incorrectly about belting, right? They think they have to work like crazy hard and have to squeeze and strain. So that's the first thing. But then the second thing is, for those of us who do tend to kind of not belt intuitively, and because we're a little lighter, we tend not to trust our voices, right? I know I went for many years not trusting that my voice was capable of anything bigger, anything of me demanding more of it. And when you're not fully mentally committed to that, that's when damage happens. When you're kind of half in and you're not like just going for it, going for the whole sound, that's another thing I think that's damaging, is like, so working way too hard and then kind of not working quite hard enough.
Okay.
But for me, it's a trust issue. Like, it's a, you know, I'm going to make this big sound, but can I make it? And then as soon as I start to have that self-doubt, then it's like, nope, that's going to be a sound that's probably not going to be healthy, comfortable. So I just have to trust that my body can handle it. But I always like, so I know we kind of skipped over that a little bit, but I always start off with twang first. I make sure that they have a handle on twang, and that's slightly, I'll say thinner edge function, but even within chest voice, like letting the vocal folds not be overly thick. And so before we even go anywhere near the belting, I make sure that they've got that nice nya 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 nya, and be able to do that. Like, that's fully in chest voice, even though it sounds a little heavy. Yeah, right? That's where they need to get to that point where they can be in chest voice without it sounding like they're yelling. And once they get that, they get registration kind of down a little bit in terms of being able to cross over into the head mix, because they need to be able to access that M2. If they can't access it and it's only falsetto, then they're going to really struggle to find balance for females above the break and up into the, you know, E5, let's say. So yeah, learning to be able to get into like the still a really loud sound. It's really bright and clingy, even though it's an M2. It's my head voice. Learning to be able to even access that when you get to above a certain point. You can only keep your chest voice so high. And then they can work on belting.
Mm-hmm. You just said falsetto. Falsetto is M2, right? Or is that separate?
Falsetto's M2, but technically it's got like, there's a little gap in the vocal folds. Okay. Usually, so it's a little airier. It's not as, it's never going to be as powerful.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I think those are the big things, is like twang. Like, I always say, like, we're not forward facing sound, but I know if you feel it here, there's a good chance that you're not really pressurizing and engaging tongue root and working too hard inside the throat. So I always aim for that, because I know that this just indicates that I'm accessing this high overtone. That's all this is telling me. It's confirmation that I'm getting the brightness in the sound. And for me, I feel like if I can kind of hook that, then it doesn't pull back, and I don't engage the tongue root, and I don't do like I don't muscle my way up the scale to try to make a sound.
Okay.
You know. Did I answer that at all?
Makes sense.
Okay. And then again, like, what I would do is I wouldn't go straight for, we're gonna belt today. I would go for the calling, and the rainbow thing is just good for kind of getting them to like strengthen that, but also, again, it's a locked sound, so it's a little bit rigid. So it's good litmus test than anything. But then I would just do like the, hey, you saw a cute guy, call across the street to the guy, do the mom thing, the whiny kind of sound, and then they start to realize, oh, I can do this. And then what we hear is like, oh, did you just do that sound? You just belted. And you kind of trick them into it a little bit, because otherwise they'll try too hard and I have to sing, I have to belt.
Yes. Awesome. Thank you.
So when you were saying this area underneath the nose, above the lip, were you saying you're feeling something, a buzz back?
It's more like the sensations associated with resonance, and the sympathetic resonance, just because you hear like mass resonance, right? It's not that you're
right
down there, but the idea is that these bones conduct the higher frequencies.
Okay.
So when you're doing twang, you will tend to feel more resonance in this area.
Right.
Like I know when I'm doing it, I kind of feel a lot behind my alveolar ridge, air.
Right.
Like when I'm actually singing vowels and such, like I feel a ton of it there. And I know if I get it there, and not placing it, but I know if I feel it there, that I'm on the right track for the sound that I'm aiming for with musical theater in particular. I don't feel as much when I'm doing pop. I don't feel it there in the same way, but I aim for that when I'm working on any kind of belting, because then I know it's kind of a safe twang space for me to be in, as opposed to like a feeling of work happening here. But yeah, I don't know, we didn't get into like a lot of like really like deep belt techniques or anything like that, but I think this is a good place to start, because then I think a lot of it is really about exploration and just kind of figuring out what works for you and what aesthetic you want to have in your own singing or in a particular song. You can't just necessarily have one way of belting and one way of shaping the sound. You can have more than one, and having those options I think are good.
Great.
All right, let me get going. I think I have to record a video.
Gotta go too. Thank you so much.
No problem. So I will send you this video. I might hold off to it and send you like until after Sunday. So when I get the second video, I can just send one email with both links to you.
That's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, that works. That's great.
Alrighty.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Let me know if you have any questions too, if anything comes up.
Okay.
Great. Good to see you, Karen.
You're welcome.